What's going on, guys? My name's Joe. You can find me everywhere online at Tattoo Theist. We do a podcast once a week, Thursday nights at 6 p.m. Central Time. That is held here on YouTube. If you want to speak on the podcast, you will need to join our Discord. There will be a link in the description of the video. I'll also show you where you can get in on the website right here. We also do a Bible study once a week. It's Sunday night at 6 p.m. Central Time, and we're starting the book of Enoch. And yes, I know it's not in the canonized Bible. However, we like greater context. So we start the book of Enoch this Sunday, being tomorrow, and then that'll probably take us a couple of months. But if you want to get into the Discord, you can come to tattootheist.com or thesis.com. That's the podcast. You can find all the most recent podcast uploads right there. You can find my normal YouTube videos there. We've got shirts and whatnot. If you want to help support what we're doing, you can do that from right there. But if you go down to the middle of the page, you're going to find this Discord widget. You can just hit join now. It does not cost any money. You just hop in. And then when we do hold the podcast on Thursday night, you will be able to join the voice channel and then raise your hand and come on to speak when we actually go to do that. So we recently did a video on Lilith, which you guys were into. So what I said was, you know, if you guys want me to go more in depth on any of these specific things, because it was more of an overview, I'd be happy to do that. Just let me know. You guys let me know. So we're going to jump into a little bit more. I'm still going to try to keep it very, very short. So if we need to do a part 3, we can do that. So it'll still be somewhat of an overview, but I want to dig into the concept of Lilith as Adam's first wife a little bit more, because there's a lot to Lilith, who she was, what she did, what is the context, what is her involvement in Genesis, what is her involvement later. And we just kind of brushed over everything in the last video. There will be a card up here somewhere that you can click to find that, but it was the last video I uploaded before this. So here you go. You've got, according to Jewish folklore, Lilith was Adam's first wife. This is a pretty agreed upon Jewish view of who Lilith was. Though she was not mentioned in the Torah itself, over the centuries, she has become associated with Adam in order to reconcile contradictory versions of creation in the book of Genesis. So basically what happened, to say it very kind of bluntly, is as Jewish scholars way back when were going through scripture, going through the Torah, they realized that within Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there is kind of a contradiction of how woman came into the picture. First, we get this concept of the man and the woman both being created from dust. Then later, we get the idea that the woman was created from Adam. So I guess let me just pull back, because I think we're going to cover it here in a second anyway. So Lilith and the biblical story of creation. The biblical book of Genesis contains 2 contradictory accounts of humanity's creation. The first account is known as the priestly version, and it appears in Genesis 1:26 and 27. Here, God fashions man and woman at the same time when the text reads this. So God created mankind in the divine image, male and female God created them. Other translations will say that he created them both from dust, meaning neither man nor woman came from either man or woman. Both man and woman were created from the earth at the same time. The second account, however, of creation is known as the Yahwistic version, and it is found in Genesis 2. This version of creation is the one that I'd say most people kind of lean on. It's the one that most people will bring up when talking about these things, but it's the one that they're most familiar with, is why. So God created Adam first, then places him in the Garden of Eden. Okay. Not long after that, however, God decides to make a companion for Adam and creates the animals of the land and the sky to see if any of them are suitable partners for the man, for Adam. God brings each animal to Adam, who names it, before ultimately deciding that it is not a suitable helper for the man. God then causes a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and this is where we get the next part. And while the man is sleeping, God fashions Eve from his side. So from his rib is the way that it's described, right? When Adam awakes, he recognizes Eve as part of himself and accepts her as his companion. Now, not surprisingly, the ancient rabbis had noticed, again, this is why I paused, because now we're coming back to it. The ancient rabbis noticed that these are 2 different versions. There's really no way. If you want to explain it away and live in a fairy tale land, that's cool. That's not how I do things. That's not how our group does things. We would rather approach the text honestly. even if that means we end up with kind of hard things to have to reconcile. But I would rather be honest about what we're looking at, what we're reading, and what the history is, rather than say, oh, and do all these mental gymnastics because I feel threatened, because I feel like my faith is threatened. I don't at all. So we don't do those gymnastics here. We just go straight at it for exactly what it is, and then we discuss what potential possibilities could be for reconciliation. So when the ancient rabbis noticed the two contradictory versions of creation that appeared in Genesis, one is the Bereshit in Hebrew, they solved the discrepancies in two ways. The first version of creation actually referred to Adam's first wife. A first Eve is the way that they coined it. But Adam was displeased with her, so God replaced her with a second Eve that met Adam's needs. And we can get a little bit more into what were those needs? What were the discrepancies? Why was Adam displeased with her? Going on though, the priestly accounts describe the creation of an androgen. And this is what we're going to get into today a little bit more, is the androgen. A creature that was both male and female, which we call a hermaphrodite. Genesis Rabbah 8:1 and Leviticus Rabbah 14:1. This creature was then split into a man and a woman in the Yahwistic account. So this is where things get interesting and for some people get kind of confusing. Although the tradition of two wives, two Eves, appears early on, that interpretation of creation's timeline was not associated with the character of Lilith until basically the medieval period. And as we'll see kind of as we go on here. Now, one more thing I just want to read to you guys is this idea that scholars are not certain where the character of Lilith really comes from. Though many believe she was inspired by Sumerian myths about female vampires called Lelu, which is it's a potential possibility. This is what we consider. Or Mesopotamian myths about the succuba, or succubus, as we in modern time call them, which is a female night demon. And in the Mesopotamian myths, her name, or their name, but isolated to a single individual, is Lilith. So Lilith is mentioned about 4 times in the Babylonian Talmud, but it is not until the alphabet of Ben Sira, which we touched on in the last video, which is roughly between the 800s and the 900s, but it was in the 10th century, that the character of Lilith is associated with the first version of creation in this medieval text. Ben Sira names Lilith as Adam's first wife and presents a full account of her history. So again, I'm going to try to keep this short. So we're just going to bounce back to the androgyny, okay? And let's talk about that for a minute. The androgyny and creation. Rabbinic discussions about the two versions of creation and the androgyny can be found in Genesis Rabbah and Leviticus Rabbah, which I touched on just a few minutes ago, these are collections of midrashim. Okay, and these are, the best way to describe them is they're basically Jewish commentaries. And they were about the books of Genesis and Leviticus, obviously. In Genesis Rabbah, the rabbis wonder whether a verse from Psalms offers insight into the first version of creation, perhaps indicating that Adam was actually a hermaphrodite with 2 faces. You have formed me, this is a quote, you have formed me before and behind. That's Psalms 139:5. Jeremiah B. Lizar said this, when the Holy One, blessed be he, created the first according to this discussion, the priestly accounts in Genesis 1 tells us about the creation of a hermaphrodite with 2 faces. Then in Genesis 2, this primal androgyne, as the creation is commonly called in scholarly text, is split in half, and the two separate and become separate beings. Thus, right, a man and a woman come from this previously single person, the single entity that was believed to be by these as a hermaphrodite, both sexes. Some rabbis object to this interpretation, noting that Genesis 2 says God took one of the man's ribs to create the woman. To this, the following explanation is given, quote, he took one of his ribs. What the rabbi means here is that the phrase used to describe a woman's creation from the man's rib actually means an entire side of his body, because the Hebrew word that is used in the book of Exodus to refer to one side of the Holy Tabernacle. So they're playing word games here to try to make sense of it. A similar discussion can be found in Leviticus Rabbah 14:1, where R. Levi states, quote, When man was created, he was created with two body fonts, and he, being God, sawed him in two so that two backs resulted, one back for the male and another for the female. Super interesting. In this way, the concept of the androgyne allowed the rabbis to reconcile the two accounts of creation. Some feminist scholars also contend that the creature solved another problem for patriarchal rabbinical society. It ruled out the possibility that man and woman were created equally in Genesis 1. So this is super interesting. And kind of as time's gone on, Lilith has been used as a feminist icon within kind of scholarly, theological, seminary worlds, right? Which is the world that I come from. But Lilith is used as this feminist icon because we touched on it in the last video, and I don't want to go much longer than this, but basically the issue that Adam had with her, if you believe, if Lilith was Adam's first wife prior to Eve, and Adam and Lilith butt heads, and therefore Lilith fled, and then God said, okay, well now I'll take the rib out of Adam and I'll make you a suitable wife, being Eve. But the reason that Lilith and Adam butted heads in the myth, in the story, is it was over sex primarily, but it was over gender roles. So Adam wanted to be on top during sex, and Lilith was like, okay, well, I want to be on top sometimes. She wanted to take more of a dominant gender role within their interpersonal communication or within their interpersonal relationship. And Adam did not like that. That displeased him. And so they butt heads. Lilith flees. Angels chase her. We go into this whole thing, but that was the last video. So if you haven't watched that, go back and watch that. But there is one thing that I want to show you just real quick. So this is the depiction of what the androgyne would be, right? If Adam was a hermaphrodite, if half of him was female and half of him was male, and it resulted in the splitting, if this was the answer, this is the depiction of that, which I just think is very interesting. If you look into some of the old depictions of anything having to do with Lilith, but having to do with kind of this concept of did Adam have a first wife? What happened there? Did then he have Eve afterward? Were they first created equal, both from dust, both equal footing, and then Adam had a quarrel with Lilith, and then gender roles became a thing? It opens up, this myth opens up a lot of different discussions, and it's very interesting. But the androgyne, the hermaphrodite angle is very interesting. And I love this depiction. I just find it kind of beautiful, but also just like it piques my interest heavily. But bottom line is, anything having to do with Lilith, one, is very interesting, and two, is very deep. So again, we barely brushed the surface here. I wanted to cut it off before it got too long. If you guys want me to do more on this, dig in deeper, show you some of the other angles, and then kind of dive down those rabbit holes a little bit more than these quick brushovers, let me know and I'll make sure that happens. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Please like the video. It helps with the algorithm. And again, get in on the podcast Thursday nights at 6 p.m. Get in on the Bible study Sunday nights at 6 p.m. And you'll be able to follow everything and be notified when we have these events if you get on the Discord. So go ahead and hit that link down in the description, or go to tattootheist.com halfway down the page and hit that join button. I will see you guys on the next one.